Again today I have Bill with me, so I requested that he didn't get his hair cut just to make this look easier so I could brush his hair back and it wouldn't poke through the crepe hair. So this is the werewolf gelatin prosthetic that I'm going to be using. As it is made from gelatin, it makes it a lot easier to blend away the edges. If you watched my Joker makeup tutorial from 2 weeks ago, then you will have already seen this process, in fact in many of my Halloween tutorials. I use witch hazel for cleansing the skin as well as blending gelatin. It's a natural astringent, so it removes all the oils so the prosthetic can adhere to it. The glue I'm going to be using is Prozaid Cream Adhesive. This is from the Makeup Armoury. I use a cotton bud to apply this to the area that the prosthetic is going to be sitting. If you're new to applying prosthetics, I would advise that you place the prosthetic on the skin first, exactly where it's going to be sitting, then dust some translucent powder around the prosthetic, then remove it, and then you'll have a guide as to where you need to apply the glue to the skin. Also, before you apply Prozaid to the skin, make sure you've got the right remover. You also need to apply a small amount to the back of your prosthetic piece and wait for both the glue on your face and on the back of the prosthetic to go completely translucent before you apply it to the skin. So I only apply glue through the centre of the prosthetic first. Once I've got that firmly in place, I then apply glue to the outer areas and then stick them down one by one. It just prevents it all kind of getting a bit messy and sticking to areas that you don't want it to stick to. The central section of this prosthetic is very thick, so I got Bill to press it firmly into place. A little tip when you're applying prosthetic piece, if you apply it very lightly first, then you're able to lift it back up and manoeuvre it if necessary. So now that is sitting right, I'm just going to go around and apply some glue to the back of the prosthetic piece in the areas that I never applied any in the beginning, and then once that goes slightly clear, I'm just going to press it into place. Do your best to make sure that your edges do not fold in on themselves and that you don't stick it down with creases in. If you do get any creases, then just get some IPA, isopropanol alcohol, on a small brush, and then when you work this between the seam of the prosthetic and your skin, it will reactivate the glue, so you'll be able to lift it, stretch it back out and then re-stick it. And don't worry, it won't ruin the seal because the alcohol will just evaporate. As you can see, I'm just using a small cotton bud to go around and just lift the very edges. I use a rolling technique to get under the edge, and I always roll it towards me, not my model, because I don't want the edge to fold in on itself. If you roll it away, then your edge is going to lift up and then lay flat. Then I turn my cotton bud around to the area with no glue on, and I use that just to stick in any delicate areas around the eye. It also prevents you from getting glue on your fingers. Trust me, it's not a nice feeling. And then you have to get the remover out to get it off your fingers, and it can just get messy. So trust me, just use the end of your cotton bud. I've dipped my clean cotton bud into a small amount of witch hazel, and I'm now going round and rolling around the edges to get rid of all the flashing from the gelatin. As that witch hazel melts the gelatin, we want to create a nice flat edge, so roll your cotton bud towards the prosthetic while pulling away from it. This is going to help create a seamless edge between the prosthetic and your skin. With this particular piece, don't worry too much about the edging around the hairline. This will all be hidden when the crepe hair lays backwards. Dipping into my Kryolan Super Colour palette, I'm taking this brown shade and I'm going to work this initially into Bill's actual hairline. This is just going to help darken his hair. I don't want to use a brown hairspray because it will likely end up all over the prosthetic. By using a cream based product in Bill's natural hair, it's just going to work as a bit of a soft adhesive for the crepe hair to stick to. And in case you're wondering, it does wash out quite easily with shampoo. Once I've done his hairline and the top of his head, I'm now going to work onto the actual skin and the prosthetic. To begin with, I'm keeping this to the outer perimeters of the face. I will be working on the centre of the face as well, but I'm going to be mixing some different shades. You don't need to be too worried about getting it too sort of uniformed to begin with, because we're going to be applying hair all over this area anyway. It's just kind of a base colour so that you can't see through the crepe hair. Now I do want this to be a bit like Teen Wolf in terms of it's a human who's transfigured into a werewolf, hence the varsity jacket. So when it comes down to the neck, I'm kind of applying a very light wash of this brown onto the neck, and then I would just build it up because I still want there to be skin visible so that you can see that it isn't just an animal, it is a human and animal. On the prosthetic piece, I'm applying it with a brush and then I'm just tapping over the seams of that with a latex sponge. As there's a lot of texture on the gelatin piece, you need to apply a certain amount of pressure to get that colour to sit in between that texture so it doesn't look uneven. Using a flat brush, I'm applying a more precise amount of that brown onto the nose itself, and I'm making sure this is a slightly thicker layer because I want this area to be more intense in colour. And then I'm just feathering that up the nose to meet the top of the forehead. It may annoy you, but I am going to leave the nostrils till the very last minute, so they will be pink until the very end. I'm also taking a small amount of that down the philtrum area, and again, this just kind of makes it look more animalistic. It also makes me look a little bit more like a dog. I'm now taking a lighter shade of the Supra colour, and I'm working this on the high points of the face. So this is going on the brow area. It's also going to go around the sides of the nose and over the top lip. And again, when using your brush, you need to be quite forceful to really get it in between that texture on the gelatin piece. When the two shades meet, I use a lighter hand and feather the colours together so that we get a nice gradient between the two shades. Going back to the darker brown, I'm applying this over the lid and working that up towards the arch of the brow. As this is a cream based product, it is going to crease in the eye as the skin warms up. I'm going to be setting this later with some translucent powder. I'm also going to be going over it with a black eyeshadow. So for now, don't worry, just get it down as a base. Still working with that same brown Supra colour, I'm working that around the outer perimeter of the jaw towards the chin, but we're going to be going in with the lighter shade on the chin, so don't take it all the way across. Now I'm going in with a second layer of that same brown and deepening the shade from the hairline, working it down and around the jaw. When you use a swiping motion with the cream based product, you start to blend it out. I want this to be more opaque, so I'm using a patting motion to build up the colour payoff. To fill in the chin, I'm using the slightly lighter brown and I'm feathering the colour across when it meets the darker shade. To do this, again, you just use a very slightly lighter hand, but creams are such a dream to work with, they just blend so easily. Going back to the darker brown, I'm using this to fill the lips in. You can use a brown lipstick if you prefer. I'm just using the same colour because I want it to be exactly the same colour as the shades that we've got on the face. I'm now going into the black Supra colour and I'm going to use this to darken the nose and around the eyes. Again, I don't want a wishy-washy payoff, so I'm using a patting motion to press this onto the skin. I'm using this black to deepen the arch of the brow, which just gives it a bit more of a sinister feel. Again, don't worry about this creasing for now because before you set it, you would just blend away the creases and then set it in place. Next, I'm taking an even lighter brown shade and using a stipple brush from Delim Tools, I'm dusting that over the high points of the face. You want to use a light hand to do this because you want it to blend over but not into those creases that are on the prosthetic piece. Now don't worry if they're not too noticeable at the moment because we're going to go in and deepen them with a darker shade. So I've taken that shade and I've used it to highlight the centre of the chin. I'm also pressing that on to the cheekbone area and then using my latex sponge to bounce that over the top just to soften it. I've dipped a fine liner brush into a small amount of the black, which I've worked off onto the back of my palette, so there's only a small amount left on it, and I'm working that between the creases to deepen them. Now don't worry if they come out a little bit intense to begin with. We want the colour to get into those creases before we go back over them with the brush with the highlighter shade to soften them. It's all about layering colours until you're happy with the depth. And remember, it's always easy to add, but it is harder to take away. So just be cautious with everything that you do. Next, I'm taking some RCMA powder, which is also from the Makeup Armoury. This is the No Colour Translucent powder, and I'm dusting quite a bit of that onto the face and the prosthetic. I'm using a patting motion to work that into the skin, and I'm using a very, very light hand, and sometimes I'll even hold the very end of my sponge and kind of bounce it over the skin with a slapping motion. It sounds harder than it is. You're kind of dusting at the same time as you're patting. You can see here my technique, but it does work quite well. I'm using a small fluffy brush to work that over the eyelids. And again, as you can see, I'm putting quite a lot of the powder on there to really set it in place. And then I'm using a very, very soft face brush to dust off the excess powder. And a bit like when you're doing generic beauty makeup, when you're baking your face, you end up with a bit of a chalky appearance until you use a setting spray. I'm using a sealer for theatrical makeup. This one is the green marble one and it's from the Makeup Armoury, and I'm using that just to give a light dusting over the face so it sets in place, but it also takes away a little bit of that powdery finish. I'm going in with a black alcohol activated paint around the eyes. No, I'm using the Skin Illustrator activator because that one is safe around the eyes. When Bill wears ordinary contact lenses, he finds them to be a little bit uncomfortable. It's probably due to the fact that he has an astigmatism, so his eyes aren't shaped correctly for standard fashion contact lenses. So we do find his eyes can get a little bit watery, especially when he's putting them in or when he's first wearing them. So I always get him to apply them after the makeup, but obviously I don't want the makeup to move. And the alcohol activated paints are sweat and water resistant, so they're ideal around the eyes. Moving on to the hair application, I'm applying some Prozaid with a cotton bud over the top of the makeup that we've applied on the skin. So we are first off concentrating around the hairline. Once it goes almost completely translucent, we know we're ready to apply the hair. So I'm taking small amounts of my crepe hair and I'm cutting it in a straight line so that I've got a nice edge to apply to the skin, and then I'm using an orange wood stick to press the very tips of that hair into the glue. And I've made the hair long enough so that it lays over the top of Bill's hair and goes backwards. And then it's just a case of constantly repeating this process until you're happy with how much hair you've built up for your werewolf. When I'm applying the first layers of the hair, I'm not too concerned if the hair is quite flat when it lays on the actual forehead itself. It's only when we get towards the front area of the hair where it's going to be seen at the root, we want it to lift from the root so it looks like it's grown out of the face. Whereas the hair at the back, all these areas that I'm laying down now, you're not going to notice too much, so you can be a little bit less sort of precise with it in terms of how it's laying on the skin. If you've not seen this kind of hair technique before, I have done it on my Joker tutorial, I did it on my Game of Thrones White Walker tutorial, so I will link them on screen for you and you can go and check them out. The Joker one is really fun because we built up a whole new head of hair. Every now and again as I'm laying down the hair, I'm throwing in a small amount of grey. And I want to use this quite sparingly because we don't want it to age him as a werewolf. However, adding in a few grey hairs here and there just makes it look more realistic as an animal. So as we get close to the front, I'm adding in more and more sparse hairs. I'm making sure that as I lay them down, they're standing more upright, and I lay a small amount of the hair down and then I pull away the excess hairs so we're left with less and less as they come further forward. This creates a more realistic hairline. It shows that it's also not a wig. It's also a great way to disguise any edges on your prosthetic piece if you had trouble blending it. I'm now going to start applying some of the hair down the side of the jaw and onto the cheekbone area. Don't worry if the ear's showing at this point because you can manipulate the hair with some hairspray to cover the ears. The great thing about crepe hair is that it's really pliable. You can use your hands to kind of mould it into shape. I'm using some scissors just to trim it so it's not too long. It doesn't matter that it is quite a straight edge because again, once you manipulate it with your fingers, you can curve it, shape it. However, if you don't want it to look so straight when you cut it, you can just cut into it or feather it. The reason I chose crepe hair for this look is because of the actual texture of it. It looks as if it could be quite coarse, but it's actually very, very soft. It looks quite wiry, which is ideal for a werewolf. Crepe hair is also relatively affordable. For around a metre length of it, it is about £4. It also comes in a variety of colours. You can opt for different types of hair. There is yak hair, you could use synthetic extensions. There are lots of different options available. Obviously, you just need to select the right type of hair for your character. I've applied some cream Prozaid to the top lip on the outer half on both sides, and while that dries I'm just applying some individual strands to the top of the forehead so that the hair kind of comes down a bit like a widow's peak. So it's a good idea to apply some glue, move on to another section, wait for that to dry, then come back to it so you've always got something going on. As I've never done this look before, my plan of action was to work on one side first with the hair and then get a feel for it, work out the layout, and then I could just match the other side up. So for the actual amount of hair that you need, it really depends on how much you're going to apply. I needed to mix up more than I anticipated, but the 4 colours that I used were only a metre long and I didn't need any more of that to do the entire face. So while I finished off applying hair to one side of Bill's face, Tommy was in the background just mixing up some more colours for me, so I had those ready to go to do the opposite side of the face. Now I've got the majority of the brown in place, I've just gone in with a few extra grey hairs just at the very front so that they're more visible, and I'm also applying some of those to the top lip now that that glue has gone completely translucent and tacky. As you can see, I'm holding a bunch of hairs close to the lip and I'm using that orange wood stick just to press a few individual strands into the glue and then pulling the rest away. That way we get a nice sparse appearance to the hair. I'm also doing the same around the bottom half of the chin because we don't want this to be too full on, we want it to taper to almost nothing, so we just apply a few sparse hairs there. Now I'm using the back of my hand just to manipulate the hair up and backwards while spraying it with a small amount of the Gotta Be Glued hairspray. If Bill was going out now, I would apply a lot more around the back of the hair and to the neck just to give it a little bit more volume, but as it's just for a tutorial and we're taking it off after, I'm more than happy with the amount of hair we got on. Another product that I got from the Makeup Armoury is this Ben Nye Clean Grease. And using a cotton bud, I'm dabbing that on the end of the nose to give it a wet look. If you think of it like a dog, they have a little bit of a wet nose, so I want to give that appearance to the nose. Then these are the teeth that I made out of polymorph, so we're just popping those into the bottom half. I had made a top and bottom set, but it was just a bit too full on. So this just gave me the look that I wanted, and it wasn't too offensive, but it was still a little bit scary. You can, however, go for that dog fang effect and have a bit more of a vicious looking mouth. If you do decide to recreate the look, I would love to see your versions. Please tag me in it on Instagram, which is @ShowMeMakeup.